Now we'd like to introduce Dr. Zinn. All right, Dr. Zinn he wrote The People's History of the United States and was one of the first people to actually look at history not from the viewpoint of the victors, but from the viewpoint of the oppressed. He's been a lifelong activist, a leader of progress, and a teacher as well. So due to that, we would like to introduce our poet.
We're going to introduce Will Copeland, who is going to come out here. There we go. He's an amazing poet, slam poet. Not good at doing intros. I'm not giving him enough credit for all the good work he does. He works with Detroit Summer, and I'm going to let him speak for, his words speak for how powerful he is.
Thank you very much. How is everybody doing? That doesn't sound too good. How is everybody doing? That sounds a little bit better. That sounds a little bit better. Now I'm asking a question, which if you're not doing so good, you don't have to sound so good. How's everybody doing? Okay, that's pretty good. Well, I'm definitely excited to be here and excited to share this poem with you. And I hope that this poem touches on a couple of the issues, that you guys saw to be important. And it also touches on one of the issues and one of the invitations, which is in your folders. There's a little half sheet, and it says that in January, I noticed that a couple of the groups mentioned the environment and mentioned concern about what the environment is going to be like over the next 20 years. And there's just a little half sheet. It's going to be a little get-together in January to have everybody, especially young folks, get together, and we're going to bring in some folks from Chicago to talk about what you can do in terms of the environment, in terms of access and opportunity to making change and learning about what's going on. And I'm going to need your help. When I say breathe in, I would need everybody here to say breathe out. We breathe in. Breathe out. We breathe in. Breathe out. We breathe in. Breathe out. Y'all know what that's called? Respiration. It's high time that somebody writes rhyme for respiration. If it's a desperate mess we're facing or a stressful situation, breathe in. Breathe out. Breathe in, inhale vapors and dark clouds to shine. Breathe out, factory smoke retraces the skyline. Breathe in, incinerator smoke, keep your own distance. Breathe outdoors, shallow breath, choke car emissions. Breathe, gas for breath. In urban passages, just to breathe can be a cancer threat. Shattered glass, fragments dance. Ever smell shrapnel? That smell lasts just until you leave the Southwest. People who never been in this hood may doubt this, but local companies dump waste in the sewer grates. Little children play in pools of water that are blue and gray. No trees, no green, cement and metal, eyes closed, lungs burning up, breathing with the devil. No insurance, so even breathing is a risk, and we're pissed. Please remember this. We breathe in. Breathe out. We breathe in. Breathe out. We breathe in. Breathe out. That's respiration. Now, does the mayor not know where there ain't no street lights? Let's see. Either pay the rent or the heat, right? We drive north where it ain't the same billboards, advertisers, eyesores, and the liquor emporiums. Remind me what the grocery store is for again? Ain't no Whole Foods, the meat done spoiled again. What's the condition? Without good nutrition, youth are the solution to make this improvement. What is the answer to cancers and asthma? What is our destination? We breathe. What is our destination? We breathe. What is our destination? We breathe with the trees. That's respiration. Together we breathe in. We breathe in. Breathe out. We breathe in. Breathe out. We breathe in, inhale vapors and dark clouds that shine. Breathe out as factory smoke retraces the skyline. Breathe in, inhale vapors and dark clouds to shine. Breathe out, our ancestors retrace our own lives. We breathe in. Breathe out. We breathe in. Breathe out. We breathe in. Breathe out. That's respiration. Thank you for breathing with me.
Thank you, Will. That was an amazing poem. And next up, we have Dr. Zinn here, finally. And this whole day is about dialogue and also thinking about what issues face the youth today, what we're going to be faced with in 20, 50, maybe even 100 years. And we're going to have Dr. Zinn talk to us in response to what we wrote down on the board, or on the butcher paper. We want you to actually just tell us from your experiences and your study of history and, you know, just your life in general as well, what advice can you give us? Like, how can youth influence change in society? So that is the question we posed to Dr. Zinn. And also, while he's talking, you know, this is a day of dialogue, so, you know, while not rudely interrupting, but if you guys have any questions during that, it's supposed to be a dialogue. So if you have a question about something he says, or if he even has a question about what some of you say, feel free to just speak up, raise your hand, we'll get a mic over to you, and then hopefully we'll get a dialogue, a conversation going.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. An unusual group of people doing unusual things. So I'm not giving you a speech or a lecture or anything like that. I'm here, as you said, a dialogue, right? That we're here to talk with one another. And, you know, if any questions you have, I'll try to answer. Any questions I have, you'll try to answer. And so, is there anybody who has a question to start things off?
Just raise your hand.
Yes.
I'll take it over. It could be about anything. Any questions?
How do you feel about violence in the media, such as the Iraq War or War on Terror?
Oh, that's all. A little question. How do I feel about violence in the media and the Iraq War and the War on Terror?
Well, how it affects people around it, watching it, the youth, everything like that.
Well, okay. This will only take a couple of hours to answer. Violence in the media. Well, you know the answer to that better than I. That is, you know how much violence there is in the media because probably all of you watch television, right? You go to the movies and you know, I just recently saw this film with Matt Damon and Jack Nicholson and The Departed, okay? No, talking about violence in the media, right? And it's interesting to me. Actually, I went to see it because it's the only reason I went to see it is because I know Matt Damon, because I've known him since he was 5 years old. And so my wife and I went with his mother and her husband. We went to see it in Boston. And I read what the critics had to say about that film. How many of you have seen it? Well, not too many of you. Okay. Well, for the rest of you, let me tell you. It's a very violent film. Am I right? A lot of violence in it. But the way things are with violence in the media, all the critics that I read loved this film. I hated it. And they loved it because what was important to them was how exciting it was, you know, and how good the acting was, and how good the direction was. You know, all the superficial things that people point at when they're trying to judge a film or a play or television. I mean, to me, those are not the important things. To me, the important things are, what is the effect of this film on the people who see it? And to me, it seemed that when you get young people, especially young people, accustomed to violence, you even get them grooving on violence. Even though, if you talk to the director of the film, they'll say, well, we're showing, this is the way things are. This is the excuse very often of showing violence on television. They say, oh, that's reality. We're showing reality. You never just show reality. You always are saying something about reality, always having an effect. You're never just describing something. Every description is a prescription. Every time you describe something, the way you describe it says something to the people you are talking to. And, I mean, I'll give you another example. Oliver Stone, some years ago, made a film about the Vietnam War called Platoon. Any of you see it? Okay, the same three people. So since you haven't seen it, you have to believe me when I tell you what it's about. But Oliver Stone was in Vietnam. He's anti-war, anti the Vietnam War. And he made this film as an anti-war film to show the horror of Vietnam. And my wife and I were sitting in this theater. Actually, it was a preview of the film in Boston. And because it was a preview, they invited a whole bunch of high school kids from the Boston area. So my wife and I were sitting among all these high school kids who were watching this film, which is supposed to be an anti-war film. And you could interpret it that way because it showed how horrible it was in Vietnam. But in the violent scenes, even in the scenes where American GIs were killing innocent Vietnamese women, there was a great, like, hey, hooray. Everybody, the people in the audience, the young people in the audience seemed to be getting a charge out of it, getting a charge out of all that violence. And it made me think about how much there is in the media that pretends to be just describing violence, showing violence, pretending to be something good, but actually sort of revving young people up to get accustomed to violence. I don't know, some of you may disagree with me. A lot of people disagree with me. But Matt Damon's mother felt the same way as we did about it. In fact, it's odd. Here he was in this very violent film. She is a teacher, and her specialty is teaching nonviolence. Really, teaching conflict resolution and nonviolence. And she didn't like it. And she told him so afterward. Anyway, you asked about violence in the media. And as you know, yeah, there's a lot of it. There's too much of it, too much excuse for it, all sorts of rationalizations for it, justifications. Oh, we don't mean to make people, but, that's the effect. Anyway, you asked other questions, and if I answer them, there won't be time for anything else. But I'll answer them briefly, okay? The war in Iraq. How can you answer that question, right? The war in Iraq is a horror. It's a crime. It's a war crime. After World War II, they put the Nazi leaders on trial. And the main charge against the leaders of the Nazi regime, they had been defeated, right, in World War II. And now they were on trial. The main charge against them was waging wars of aggression, which meant that Hitler and the Nazis invaded other countries, made war, They were not defending Germany. They were going into other countries, and this was called a war of aggression, not a war of defense, a war of aggression. They were hanged for that. The United States in Iraq is committing a war of aggression, not a defense. We're not defending ourselves by going into Iraq. Iraq wasn't threatening us. Iraq wasn't attacking us. Iraq wasn't attacking anybody or threatening anybody. Sure, they were, ruled by a tyrant, Saddam Hussein. There are tyrants all over the globe, ruling countries. We don't invade all of them. No. It's a war of aggression. And people are dying for no good reason. And you'll hear young people say, oh, I've got to go and fight for my country. They're not fighting for their country. Their country is not benefiting. America, the United States, we, their families, we're not benefiting from this war. The only people who are benefiting from this war are the Bush administration and the great corporations that are making profits from the war. So they're not fighting for their country. They're fighting for Bush, for Cheney, for the Halliburton Corporation. So I won't say anything more about the war in Iraq. You get the idea. So I'll be glad. But if any of you, let me just say this. If any of you disagree with my viewpoint, please speak up so we can have a real dialogue, right? Yes. Yes. Oh.
Just about the issue of violence in media. I was thinking, isn't the point of media or just entertainment to show us the extremes of life itself, be it violence or extremes of love, or just the extremes of the world that we may not be able to experience in real life? I mean, surely after seeing a movie such as Saw 2, you're not urged to go and enact these type of things on other people unless you have your own issues. But the point of television or even movies, this is the main focus of movies, is to show us these extremes. The Romans, they delved in like violence and in the arena, in combat, but they were extremely intelligent individuals. We see this in the architecture and whatnot. So surely the point of the media or the entertainment is to show us extreme violence, something we can't do in our own civilized society.
Ah. So is that good?
For containing ourselves, I would
For
say,
entertaining ourselves.
Yeah, I would say that it is good to be able to delve in that type of emotion is good. I mean, and not enact it yourself. I mean, it seems for me to serve a purpose.
And the purpose is?
To entertain.
To entertain,
rather. To be entertained by the extremes of violence or, true love or things like that. The extremes.
Any other views on that?
I just wanted to add along to that. I think the media does a good job of, the reason there are movies that, or, a lot of reports on negative things that happen on the news involving violence is, I think after a while, like, these portrayals kind of normalize violence and normalize aggression, normalize fear, normalize paranoia, like, all of these negative things. And people just become, it's to desensitize us to, to see, oh, well, there's bombs being dropped in Iraq right now. And we're, like, I remember the first broadcast when the first bombs were dropped in March of, I think it was 2003 maybe. It was just really bizarre to watch. It was almost like they presented it like a splendor, like some kind of spectacle. And I think it's just to desensitize and normalize it. And also, along with that, I think a lot of the times we're presented with these broadcasts of, of negative things that are happening in our communities to distract us from, other things that could be more positive, or to distract us from the reporting on positive change in our community or good things that people are doing, or having space open for community dialogue or community direct control over the channels. Obviously, a lot of the major news channels are owned by huge corporations, and a lot of the way they present things has a lot to do with how it's normalized and how it sinks into people's daily psyche and whatever. So.
I might not need a microphone. I'm long enough. Oh, okay. Well, this is kind of going back to Iraq, but not really. I was born there, and I was there when the first Gulf War happened. So, being kind of on the other side, when you don't have no weapons and someone is bombing you, we lived right in Baghdad, and we had to sleep in churches, pray to God they will not bomb us. But what we saw on television back there was just every death, every bombing. They showed clear pictures of everything. Whereas here, when I was watching for the second Gulf War, like the Arabic stations that we have, they show you these things, whereas stations here kind of cover them up. They really don't want you to know these things. And do you think that, because I feel that media is really one-sided. It's got a one-sided, point of view to a certain extent. So.
You think the media is one-sided? Well, of course the media is one-sided. The media, the woman over there made the point that the media is controlled by very rich corporations. These corporations are close to the government. When this war, this second war in Iraq started, the major television stations like Fox News and CNN, they were showing American flags all over, and they were sort of revving up the patriotism. All the media was supporting the war. So that, are they one-sided? Yes, they're one-sided in the sense that the media think their job is to support the government. But the job of a media in a democracy, if you have a democratic country, the job of the media is not to go rah-rah whenever the government goes to war. The job of the media should be to investigate, to ask questions, to inform the public, to be a kind of check on what the government does, so that the citizens reading the media will have an idea what is going on. But that's not what happened. As you were saying, what did Americans know about what was happening in Iraq? We did not see the devastation. We did not see the human effects of what we were doing in Iraq. I remember very distinctly that when that war took place in 1991 against Iraq, what were they showing? They were showing American airmen coming back from their missions, and they were all happy. Wow, we dropped bombs here, there. You did not see who was under those bombs. You did not see what people were experiencing. And the same thing actually has been true in this war, too, in the second war, that we have no idea. I mean, when the United States Army went into Fallujah in Iraq, and it was a massacre in Fallujah, a massacre. I mean, here we are, the United States, the most powerful military machine in the world. We have all these planes, we have all these bombs. Here is Iraq, a very weak little country. And the United States moves in there and bombs and destroys. And very little of that is shown on television and the media, yes.
And yet, when someone does show that, like on Fahrenheit 9/11, he shows the image of what actually happened. And a lot of people were upset by that movie just because he showed that, whereas they're not upset the fact that they've been getting one-sided points of view for a long time.
No, that's very, very, very important, because that's how they get the American people to support a war. If you think that the war isn't really hurting people, if you don't really know that there are children who are dying under our bombs, you know, well, then you will support the war. Or if there is some news that, oh, a bomb was dropped on this house and 7 women and 14 children died, and then the American military is asked about that, and they say, oh, it's an accident. We didn't mean it. Don't believe it. When I say I don't believe it, I mean it's never an accident when you drop bombs and innocent people get killed, because that's the nature of dropping bombs. When you drop bombs, you have no idea who is there. I was a bombardier in the Air Force in the Second World War, and I can tell you that we had no idea what our bombs were doing to human beings. You're up there, you drop your bombs, oh wow, we hit our target. Of course, you never really hit your target. And even though they have developed very sophisticated aiming devices now, yeah, they can aim for a house and hit the house. They can aim for a car and hit the car. But do they know who's in the house? Do they know who's in the car? And the result is that 80 to 90% of the people who die in bombings are not military people. They're not terrorists. They're ordinary people, ordinary civilians. If the American people knew that, they would never support the war. And one of the reasons the American people are kept ignorant is that they do not show the caskets coming home of I mean, not only do they certainly don't show the people in Iraq and what they're going through, but they don't show the American caskets coming home, and they don't show the pictures of the soldiers, men and women in Walter Reed Hospital who have lost arms and legs or are blind as a result of the war. And so if a war is just like a television movie, you know, if it becomes entertainment, and that's a very, very dangerous thing. So our job, I believe, as citizens, as human beings, our job is to find out the reality, to find out the truth, to see what is going on, and to think about people in other countries as if they are ours. Now, this is a psychological jump we have to make, that it's not here we're the Americans, they're the Iraqis, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys, they're the enemy. We have to get into thinking that the people in these other countries are not our enemy. The leader of their country may be our enemy, but the leader of our country may also be our enemy.
Do you believe America went from one of the most sympathized countries to the most hated country?
What? I'm sorry, say that again?
Do you believe America went from being the most sympathetic or sympathized country to being the most hated country?
Oh, that's right. I mean, I don't need that. But I like it, you see. It's so colorful, you see. Okay. Yeah. Oh, you think it's better? Oh, that's the boss. The media are the boss. You're not one of the corporate media, though. No. But this woman was talking about how people were once sympathetic to the United States, right? And now there's so much hatred against the United States, right? And you know, and the reason is obvious, you know, that I mean, the United States is now seen as sort of the big bully of the world. You know, from the patriotic American point of view, you say, wow, we're number one, we're the greatest, we're the strongest, we're the toughest. But from the point of view of these other countries, we are bullies. We are using our enormous military power to inflict huge damage on other people. And we don't care. Our government doesn't care what other people think. They don't care what other governments think even. Because, see, the whole idea of the United Nations, when the United Nations was set up after World War II, the idea of the United Nations was to prevent war in the future. I mean, they had just gone through, World War II, just gone through a war which killed 50 million people. The idea of the United Nations was not to have any more war. The only kind of war that was envisioned possibly by the United Nations was a defensive war. That is, if somebody attacked you, you would have the right to defend yourself. But clearly this was not a war in which the United States was defending itself. So when the United States tried to get the permission from the other countries in the United Nations to support its war, they wouldn't go along. So the United States just ignored the United Nations. That's called unilateralism. You do things all by yourself. You don't care what other countries do. You don't say or do. And the result is that you end up being hated by people all over the world. I mean, if you were living in a country that was being bombed by the United States, you would hate the United States government. And that's what's happening. It's interesting because, and here I just want to say something very briefly about, because the man over there brought up a question about the war on terrorism. The war on terrorism is a big fake, huge fake. It's not a war on terrorism. Because if it were a war on terrorism, then presumably the idea would be to reduce terrorism or eliminate terrorism. But if you make what you call a war on terrorism, and the result of your war on terrorism is to increase the number of terrorists in the world, in other words, you anger people. This is what happens. You bomb other countries, you invade other countries, you create great hatred against the United States among millions of people. And out of those millions of people, a small number of them will turn to terrorism. We have increased the, in fact, this is interesting, unlike the other things that I've said to you, which are very uninteresting. This is interesting. The official intelligence services of the United States, about a month ago, called the National Intelligence Estimate. They issued a report. These are the official intelligence agencies of the United States. They issued a report, and the report said the war in Iraq has resulted in an increase of terrorists around the world. The Bush administration ignored that. In fact, the press very soon forgot about it. The media soon forgot about it. But, so it's the war, the so-called war, I always call it the so-called war on terrorism, because it doesn't do anything against terrorism. It increases terrorism. And furthermore, and this I think is an important point, war is terrorism. Think about that. War is terrorism. There is terrorism. There are these terrorist groups. There's Al-Qaeda. The IRA was a terrorist group. There are Palestinian terrorist groups. There were Jewish terrorist groups. There are all sorts of terrorist groups. None of these groups, none of these terrorist groups in the world can do as much damage to human beings as a government like the United States, which has enormous military power. These terrorist groups can kill 3,000 people in one night, which is what they did on 9/11. They can kill 3,000 people in one night. We can kill 100,000 people in Iraq, 200,000 people. The first thing we did after the 9/11 was to invade Afghanistan. And presumably this was the beginning of the war on terrorism. What do we do in Afghanistan? We killed at least 3,000 innocent people in Afghanistan. We killed more people in Afghanistan than died in the Twin Towers. These are just ordinary people in Afghanistan. So war is terrorism. So the idea of a war on terrorism is sort of a contradiction in terms. So it's important to keep that in mind next time you hear the phrase, you know, war on terrorism.
Mine's kind of a two-tiered question. The first part of it is, well, as you know, history repeats itself by your book and everything. But the Roman Empire, some terrorists attacked the Roman Empire, and that was sort of the beginning of the end for them. It took 100 years or so, but that was kind of the point on when it all started going downhill. Do you think that since that 9/11, you know, everything's going to just implode and it's going to be kind of the end of America, not America, but our government's just going to crumble? And my other part is, since the United States is really born on war, it is the basis of our society and everything, if that element was taken away, do you think we would be able to be a society, have a country and a government, or do you think that without war we're nothing?
Two very good questions. All your questions are good, really. They're tough. Well, first, do I think the United States will go the way of the Roman Empire? Well, yes. No, yeah, we are now the, no, all these empires throughout history, they have all reached their height of power in the world. The British Empire, the Dutch Empire, the German, the French, the Belgian Empire, all of these empires, they controlled other countries, other people, they did terrible things, and they prided themselves, you know, the British Empire prided itself, remember, the sun never sets on the British Empire. And the British Empire fell. There's no longer a British Empire. And you know, I believe, and this is, I think, suggested by a question, I do believe that although the United States sort of looks very powerful and huge, and I mean, who can contest us on the military level, but we're basically weak because our power, ultimately, our power rests on the obedience of other people. When people withdraw that obedience, you lose that power. When you build up too much hatred, you lose that power. And I believe that when the history is written of these last few years, they will say that 9/11 was the beginning of the end of the American empire. Really. And because so you can't... An empire is built on sand, really. It doesn't have any human basis. And and what happens is empires overreach themselves. This is what happens to all these. Happened to the Roman Empire. It happened to the British Empire. They become swollen with pride and arrogance and confidence. And look how big we are. Look how much control we have over so much of the world. But they're like a balloon which is stretched and stretched and stretched until it bursts. And I believe that's going to happen to the American empire. And I'll be glad to see it, really. I'll be glad to see it. Some people think, oh, I'm a patriot. I want America to be... No. I don't want America... that's not patriotism to me. You know, to say, oh, I want America to be ruler of the world. I want us to... No, that's not patriotism. I hate to... No, I don't want to use the word to describe what I think it is. But it's not patriotism. It's not smart. It's not wise. It's not human to think that that's what patriotism is. But to your second question is, the United States is based so much on war and militarism. Think of it. Half of our budget, of the national budget, goes for war. Congress just passed an appropriations bill for the military, $500 billion. I know it's hard to even grasp that. I mean, how can you measure $500 billion for war? And meanwhile, there's no money for education, for health. They just cut $680,000. Listen to this. They just cut $680,000 out of money that was allocated for theaters for the deaf. Theaters for the deaf. They were getting an annual, subsidy from the government of $680,000. They cut out $680,000 so the theater for the deaf doesn't have this money anymore, but they're spending $500 billion. They're spending $1 billion on one submarine. Think of it, it's called a Trident submarine. It carries nuclear weapons. The question is, what can a submarine do against a terrorist? Figure that out. How does a submarine fight terrorism? The terrorists are down there, right? In the water, right? And the submarine can look for them, right? I mean, we're living in a crazy world, a stupid world. Really, that's the word I was trying to avoid using, But really, it's stupid, These people are idiots, these people in Washington. But you ask, can we survive if we're not a military nation? Of course, we'll survive much better. Imagine if we took those hundreds of billions of dollars that we're spending on war and we really used it. We could give free health care to everybody. We wouldn't have to have insurance companies and go through all these complicated medical arrangements. They have this prescription drug plan, and you have to have a PhD to figure, even if you have a PhD. I have a PhD. I can't figure it out. Really, you can't figure these things out. It's ridiculous. There are other countries that have free medical care for everybody. You don't have to fill out forms. You don't have to, We could do that if we're willing to take the money that we're spending on war and use it for health. We could offer free college education for people instead of these ridiculous tuitions that people have to pay to go to college. So, yeah, we could survive. Not only could we survive, we'd be a lot better country. People wouldn't hate us anymore. we wouldn't be invading other countries. We'd really be a model for other countries. Yes.
Okay, this might be jumping the gun a little bit, I don't know. But, and certainly this isn't the group of people to be talking to about it. Seeing as we're probably the most politically active group of kids in ever. All sitting in one room. But, I mean, for those who are unconfident about their political views in society and they feel insignificant and they're like, I don't want to vote, rah. I mean, this is all really like horrifying statistics, like the $500 million and or billion or whatever. Like what can we do about it? I mean, I'm only 17 years old, like I can't vote and I'm just me chilling in like Detroit, but I mean, what can we do?
Well, that's the big question. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, after you've said all these things and you've described the situation and you've described all the horrors that are going on, and so ultimately the question is, what do you do? Which is it's a very tough question because no one person can deal with this. We all feel powerless, and we are powerless so long as we are isolated. And this is where history comes in handy, because in past periods of history, people have gone through situations where they faced evil in the world, which was so large, so powerful, it seemed impossible to do anything about it. And it was impossible for one person or two people or 5 people or 10 people. But what happened is that small groups of people began to act, to protest, to get together, to educate other people. They began to commit acts of protest. When I say you learn from history, you look at social movements of the past. You look how things have changed in the past. You look how policies have changed. In the 1830s in this country, there were 4 million slaves, 4 million black slaves in this country. And in the 1830s, a small number of people began to agitate against slavery, and it looked impossible. How could you do anything about this phenomenon of slavery? Because not only was the South holding on to 4 million slaves, but the North was allowing them to. The federal government, the national government, was going along with this. The national government was passing laws saying, oh, if a slave escapes to the North, you've got to return them to the master. So the people who were against slavery were facing not just the slaveholders of the South, they were facing the national government. And they were just a puny little group. And then they began to act. They began to grow. They began to agitate. They began putting out newspapers. They began to organize anti-slavery societies. And then they began to organize acts of civil disobedience, acts of, well, that's what the Underground Railway was about, right? They began to carry on a kind of guerrilla warfare against the system. And the movement grew and grew and grew until it became a huge national movement, so that when the Civil War took place, and the national government was not anxious to do away with slavery, but the movement, the anti-slavery movement, pushed it in that direction. Lincoln was not anxious to do away with slavery. I don't know if you know this, but Lincoln said, look, what I really care about is that the South should come back into the Union. And if they could come back into the Union and still keep their slaves, it's okay. Did you know that? That was his attitude. It's not that he was for slavery, but he was a politician. He was that was his policy. That wasn't his #1 priority. It was just the #1 priority of people who formed the anti-slavery movement and who created a force which was strong enough so that finally Lincoln had to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. And Congress had to pass the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments. It took 30 years. It started with small numbers of people. But that's the way things change. And I lived in the South and taught in the South during the years of the movement, of what's called the Civil Rights Movement. I taught at a black women's college in Atlanta, Georgia, Spelman College. And was there for 7 years, and I became involved in the movement. And it was interesting to me, both as a historian and as a participant in the movement, how what seemed impossible became possible. Because if you looked at the South in the late 1950s, and you looked at the total absolute power of the white South, supported by the federal government, by the way, the federal government wasn't going to do anything about it. The FBI was on the side of the racists. It looked impossible to change the situation in the South. And then small things began to happen. First the Montgomery bus boycott, and then the sit-ins, and then the freedom rides, and then the demonstrations, bigger and bigger and bigger, until you had a movement that just created a great excitement in the country and in the world. And finally something gave, and the South is not the same today. And now I go back to Atlanta, where I lived and taught, and where Atlanta, when I was there in the late 50s, early 60s, Atlanta was like Johannesburg, South Africa, under apartheid. Everything was controlled by whites, total apartheid. You go to Atlanta today, I'm not saying the problems for black people have disappeared in Atlanta, the problems of poverty and so on, but it's a different atmosphere. a black mayor and black policemen, and and just a different atmosphere. Now a black person and a white person can walk down the street together without enormous tension in the street. So, what can you do? You look around and find people who agree with you, who think something should be done, and form a little group and decide what's the best thing you can do in your community or in the, whatever. Go to a high school and pass out leaflets against military recruiting. That's something very specific you can do, because military recruiters are going right, you know that, don't you, right? Military recruiters are going through all these high schools and to try to persuade young people, you don't have any future really unless you're going to the military, and then you, what a future you will have if you go into the military, yeah. But there's real work to be done against the war, against military recruiting, for all sorts of things that need to be done, and little things that you do add up. Never think that some little thing that you're doing is unimportant, because when social movements are created historically, they are created out of millions of little things that people do, which at certain points in history come together, and then something changes.
Okay, this is a long question pertaining to what you said before. I wrote everything down on a note card.
A long question, short answer.
Do you think that history is repeating itself by the fact that, how would you link together your book, A People's History of the United States, the Iraq War, and the Crusades with the Muslims in the 1300s with Saladin? Sorry, I do my research. Oh.
How do I link together my history and the Crusades and the Iraq War?
Yeah.
Well,
I know.
Some of you may remember that when the wars in Iraq started, Bush Jr., we'll call him Junior from now on, Junior talked about it as a crusade. And then some of his advisors said, hey, you better not use that word. That word doesn't sound good to people in the Middle East. The crusade was when Christians came in and killed an awful lot of people, for, a religious crusade. No. But the truth is, we're doing the same thing that they did in the Crusades, and armies going into the Middle East and with kind of fanaticism. And so I won't say anything more about that.
Okay, my question is, I wanted to know, what is your stand on taking away the right for gays and same-sex people to become married, and other forms of basically taking other civil liberties and other rights from the citizens of the United States?
Well, I'm not sure. I heard your question. Say it again. Say it again.
What I'm saying is, basically, how do you feel about same-sex marriages?
Same-sex marriages, oh.
And other, I'll say, issues that are used to decrease the amount of rights that citizens have.
Okay. Gay marriages. Terrible thing. So are ungay marriages. I mean, marriage has problems. Marriages have problems. The gay, ungay. The whole idea of singling out gay marriages is, if it's not a gay marriage, it's really good. Look at the divorce rate in the United States. It's like a 50% divorce rate. I'll bet the divorce rate among gay couples is not as high as that. Anyway, the whole idea that the government can decide what you should do with your private life is ridiculous. And, you know, people should be free to live their private lives in whatever sexual way or marriage way or non-marriage way. You know, it's ridiculous that the government should in any way interfere with this or decide who can get married and who cannot get married. It's you know, it's barbaric. You know. And it's also ironic that the Republican Party, which has always said, oh, we don't believe in government interference. They always said, we believe in less government. This was the idea of conservatism in the Republican Party. We believe in less government. In other words, the government should interfere less. But here they are, right? They do believe the government should interfere if women want an abortion. They believe the government should interfere with same-sex marriages and so on. No, if we lived in an intelligent world, we wouldn't even have to deal with questions like this.
On the tone of civil liberties, what do you think about the security versus civil liberties? Like, you know what I mean? Yeah, the Patriot Act, wiretaps and such.
Well, that's the idea. Make us more secure by taking away our liberties. And, you know, you can't do this and you can't do that and you can't say this and you can't say that. And you don't have a right to a trial if you're picked up, and because it's all for security. You know that this new law that was passed, you're probably way ahead of me on this, but you probably know this new law that was passed, the Military Commissions Act, which was just passed, right, a week or so ago. That by this law, anybody can be picked up. It doesn't matter whether you're a citizen or non-citizen, anybody in this country, or out of this country, anybody can be picked up and put away without anybody knowing about it, without any right to a lawyer, without any right to have your family visit you, without anybody knowing where you are, without any charges being brought against you, any evidence. Did you know that? That's the Military Commissions Act. Because all they have to do is, what the Military Commissions Act says is that the President or Rumsfeld, anybody who is designated by the President or the Secretary of Defense, that is Bush or Rumsfeld, anybody that they designate can decide who is an unlawful enemy combatant. So they can come into your house tomorrow, I'm serious about this, and pull out your father, your mother, or you see, because you have been declared by somebody you don't know as an unlawful enemy combatant, and then take you away. And you'll say, hey, what are the charges against me? Sorry, we're not telling. Hey, I want to see a lawyer. Forget it. Hey, I want my family. No, you have no rights anymore. You can be held indefinitely without trial. I mean, this is the kind of thing that happens in a totalitarian state. This is what happened in Nazi Germany, the Gestapo knocking on your door, out, really. Nobody hears from you again. This happened under Stalin. You know, again, take you away in the middle of the night. Or maybe we'll do it the American way. We'll do it during the daytime. And more humane, yes. And all because, and that's supposed to make us more secure, which is ridiculous. Because they're making us more insecure every day that we're fighting this war. They're making us more insecure. And they're pretending that they're making us more secure by tightening all the restrictions on our lives. You know, I just went through this, well, you know, if you've been in airports and you've flown, you know what you go through. And And I just went through coming here from Boston, you know, because I look like a dangerous person. And, you know, patting me down very carefully, every inch of my body. You know, it's very, yeah, nice, yeah. And if somebody else did it, it would be nice, but not the security people. And next to me, I see a little old lady, you know. Granted, I obviously could be a terrorist. But this little old lady, you know, and she can barely walk, you know, and they're putting her through the same thing, and they're all, you know, making us more secure. It's, no, when I said we're living in a bizarre society, crazy, stupid, really, I don't know how we can put up with this. Well, the truth is we can't put up with this. We mustn't put up with this. People have to protest against this. You know, we have to get rid of this government. And really, in whatever, I'm not sure how we're going to do it. But it's, you know, we're being occupied. This country is being occupied by a small group of men who've taken power and who are just doing whatever they want to us and to other people in the world. And we have the problem of organizing and protesting and building a movement to change things.
Now we would like to, if you have any questions for any of the youth here, that they can answer for you.
Oh. What do you think? And do any of you feel that I've overstated the case, I've exaggerated, that I've, you know, missed something, and you want to present another point of view? Yes.
I'm not pro or anything. I just want to make it clear. Then what possibly could have? Not understand what possibly as if to imply that there's. As if to imply that there was no other solution. But then, just because, I do want to get away from this issue because, but just as a closure, what could have been America's retaliation to September 11, 2001? I mean, what would have been most logical? What would have been, you know, a peaceful fiscal plan that wouldn't lead to Roman demise, right? Yeah. I mean, I know we're not trying to ask more questions, but just you were presenting that, you know, this is downfall, this is horrible, the war is horrible. I mean, then of all the people, of the lives that were lost in the trade centers.
Yeah.
Sorry. If the lives that were lost in the trade centers, what could have what should have America have done? I mean, just in any.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Did you all hear that? Yeah. What could, right, the United States have done after all those people were killed in explosions at the World Trade Center? You use the word retaliation, right?
Well, there's one option. But
Yeah. Yeah. No, the reason I seize upon that is a lot of people, when something like that happens, people ask, how can we retaliate? What does that mean? How can we get back at the people who did this?
Take revenge for the lives lost.
What's that?
Take revenge for the lives lost.
How can we
The idea is to take revenge for the lives.
take revenge? Okay, retaliation, revenge. Revenge for the lives lost. Those two words bother me. Retaliation and revenge. Who do you retaliate against? Here's what we did. Here's what the United States did. We retaliated after the killing of 3,000 people in New York by killing 3,000 people in Afghanistan. Is that good?
No.
Is that?
What do you feel that we should have
I will tell you in a minute. But first I want to say what we shouldn't have done. What we shouldn't do is like strike out blindly in anger, rage, retaliation, revenge. Because what do you do then? You just are doing more damage to more people. You're killing more innocent people. And what is that supposed to do? Make you feel good? That, people say, oh, you've got to do something. No, you don't have to do it. So, you don't have to do that. You have to think very carefully about what you should do. Because what if the thing that you do in retaliation, revenge, does not make things better, it makes things worse? What if you're not preventing any more terrorist attacks, but you're increasing the possibility of more terrorist attacks? What if you're not saving lives, but taking lives? Then what's the point of revenge, retaliation? There's too much revenge in our society, too much retaliation. Oh, somebody did something to me, I've got to do something to them. But what's even worse is not I'm going to do something to them, I'm going to do something to them. I'm not going to do something to the people who did something to me, I'm going to do something to anybody. I'm going to do something to their families. I'm going to do something to people they don't even know. And then I'll feel better because I've retaliated. That's what we did. What we should have done, is if we had an intelligent president, if we had a, and a humane president, and a president who understood that to strike out blindly because you're big and tough and you have bombs and you can throw bombs around and, oh, wow, we did something about 9/11, is stupid, you see. Stupid. So the intelligent thing to do would be to sit down and say, hey, what caused this? What was the reason for this? Who is behind this and why were they behind it? And after all, terrorism is not just the act of insane people. Oh, they're fanatics, and they're wrong, you see, for committing acts of terrorism. But if they knew some history, or if they cared about history, the people in charge would say, hey, let's take a look at the history of terrorism. Let's take a look at other acts of terrorism. Let's look at the IRA and its terrorism. Let's look at the Palestinian. Let's look at the Israelis. Let's look at people in Sri Lanka. Let's look at acts of terrorism, and let's try to analyze it and figure out what's behind it. And if they did that, they would realize very quickly that this act of terrorism was a response to what the United States is doing in the world and in the Middle East. It's a response to that. It's not a humane response, but that's at the heart of it. That's the reason for it. The reason for the terrorism is that the United States, has been acting in the Middle East and other places like, as I said before, a bully. We have been making war again and again. There's still the memory of the 1991 war and how many people were killed in that war, and how at the end of that war we stationed troops in Saudi Arabia. And if you notice, most of the hijackers came from Saudi Arabia. Didn't come from Iraq, they came from Saudi Arabia. So we would ask, what is behind this? And what's behind it is the policies of the United States and the world. One of the questions that could be asked is, hey, how come New Zealand doesn't face terrorism? How come Costa Rica doesn't face terrorism? How come Belgium or Holland? How come Sweden and Norway? Why the United States? And Bush will say, oh, well, that's because we represent freedom and democracy. No, no. There are other countries in the world that are freer and more democratic than us. They're not the object of terrorism, and the reason they're not the object of terrorism is that they don't go around sending troops into other countries and making war on other countries and stationing military bases in other countries. We do. So an intelligent response to 9/11 would be, we'd better reconsider our position in the world. We'd better reconsider our foreign policy. We ought to consider whether we should maintain military base in Saudi Arabia. whether we should maintain, whether our warships should be all over the world, whether we should have military bases in 100 different countries in the world, which is what we have. Maybe we should reconsider whether we should be a military superpower. And maybe we should become a humanitarian superpower. Maybe instead of sending planes with bombs to other places in the world, send planes with food and medicine to other places in the world. Now that's, if an intelligent, that would be an intelligent response, you see. But they don't want that response because they don't want to change our foreign policy. They want to move around the world. They want to control other places in the world. So they're not going to do that. Instead, they're going to, turn the American people to the idea of revenge and retaliation. And
probably also fearful of like a civil revolution against an inactive government. I mean, then what do you have then? A bunch of people who lost their family go against a government system who they feel is inactive because they're not doing anything for them.
Well, you think the families of the people who were killed in the Twin Towers would... I'm sorry. Well, you...
I don't know. I just felt like if there would have been, I'm not at all in support of anything that's going on or the treatment of people in Iraq, but if there wouldn't have been some kind of, I guess, feeling of something being done over there, like where people who have lost, like had family members that had died, like if they felt that they were like, I don't know, I guess trying to come up with like an intelligent solution, but I guess people right now, I guess it comes back to, I don't even know what I'm trying to say, but I guess people they can see if you're in another country and you're I guess killing people, but they can see that that's like trying to get revenge for what had happened to them. Like if you're killing another person, they're like, oh, okay, well, we're trying to get rid of the people that killed all these people, like killed people on September 11th, but it's actually just, I don't know, I guess coming back to the people, and I guess I agree with Adam in that. I feel that there would have been a social revolution if there wouldn't have been, yeah.
You mean?
Like if we would have been more reserved and wouldn't have done anything, like then I think that there would have been more of a social revolution of the people would have been really angry that there hadn't been something done by the government. So.
Yeah.
I'm against the war in Iraq, and to what Adam, what's your name? And what Melanie said, I don't feel that the Bush should have went to Iraq. I think September 11th is an excuse to be in Iraq. And killing 3,000 people in Iraq, we're still mourning after 5 years, September 11th. So why we go bomb other countries so they can mourn over their family members? So taking revenge on another country doesn't make it right for what happened to us. And Bush said that the reason we're in Iraq is for weapons of mass destruction. So why are we using 9/11 as an excuse for being in Iraq when the whole reason for going over there is for weapons that we haven't even found? So I don't understand what's the whole point of why we're over in Iraq.
I don't believe that we're over in Iraq for anything other than the fact that Bush wants the oil that is over there, the oil reserve that they have over in Iraq. And I don't think 9/11 was an act of terrorism. I believe that the United States, not the United States, but some of our government did it themselves. Like, I just received some facts that how was the Twin Towers gonna collapse over 2 planes flying into them? And it doesn't make any sense.
With the weapons of mass destruction, it is said that one of our older presidents sold Iraq and Iran the weapons of mass destruction. So if anything, we were the ones that gave them the weapons to try and kill us. And also, there are no weapons of mass destruction there. I don't believe that there are. It's just a reason. And George Bush said on television, Saddam Hussein tried to kill his daddy. So I believe that George Bush just wants something to try and get revenge on them. George Bush is one of the dumbest presidents, I must say. Thank you.
I'm the first generation of Vietnam War because like since United States invade Vietnam, because like they say it's a secret war, but how come the Americans didn't get involved in it? Because my people didn't suffer enough. 31st years passed by because my parents tired of it because the war's going on. They can't do anything about it because like some of the people, my people, lost their lives. Can't do anything about it back in the old days.
You know, a lot of things happening in Iraq remind us of what happened in Vietnam. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, because there too, in the case of Vietnam, enormous human damage was done by that war. You know. And they were talking about weapons of mass destruction. You really think the government cared about weapons of mass destruction? No. There were motives. You think that the government, went into Vietnam saying, "Well, we want to stop world communism." You think they really cared about that? When the United States went to Vietnam, China was already communist. China with 1 billion people was already communist. So here's this little country south of China with 20, 30 million people, and half of them are already communist in North Vietnam, half of them are not. And so the United States is going to go into Vietnam to prevent half of this little country from becoming communist and kill several million people for that reason? Doesn't make any sense. The answer is they have other motives, motives that they don't tell the people. They have other reasons. And you were talking about, who was talking about oil? Yeah, you're not supposed to talk about oil. But we always there are other reasons. And the reasons have nothing to do with, not even with revenge or retaliation. All of these are things that they're trying to make the American people feel better. Oh, we're retaliating, we're avenging, or we're doing something about weapons of mass. It's all something to persuade the American people that they care about us. Government doesn't care about us. They don't care about people over there, and they don't care about people over here. And as soon as we learn that, we'll be better off. Anyway,
is it okay if I ask a question?
We're trying to wrap up too, so if it's kind of like a response, and so other kids can kind of get a couple more kids to talk. Do you want to say?
No, it's good.
Ask your question.
I was just wondering why, why the Bush administration is just totally unaccountable. Why? I mean, it seems like they're doing a lot of illegal stuff, or at least unconstitutional stuff. Why can't somebody pin it on them? I don't understand what's happening here.
Do you want to say a couple of questions, and then you can kind of answer all together?
Well, no, I'll answer them one at a time, but very briefly, okay? The Bush administration is not accountable because there's nobody to hold them accountable in the government. Congress isn't holding them accountable. The courts aren't holding them accountable. The press isn't holding them accountable. The only people who can hold them accountable are us and the American people. And that will take some doing. That will take a lot of work. That will take building up a movement. But we can't depend on the rest of the government or in the press. Can't depend on those people to hold the Bush administration accountable. You have a congressman from Detroit, John Conyers, is trying to hold the Bush administration accountable by proposing that Bush be impeached, which is a nice idea. You know, impeached and removed from office. Of course, he's having a lot of trouble persuading the other members of Congress, but it's at least he's trying.
Do you think because of Vietnam and all the images that people were shown and how that made the public not want to be in war, that was the reason media changed so much and that it doesn't show images anymore, so then they can have more control and people can't have their own opinion? Oh, sorry. So people can't have their own opinions about it?
Is that a question? It's just, or a statement.
I was asking your opinion about it.
My opinion about, I'm sorry, say that again?
Okay. Your opinion about, do you think that because of the newspapers and the images that people are shown of what happened in Vietnam, that changed the way media is?
Yeah, I have no doubt that one of the things that turned the American people around on Vietnam, because when the war started in Vietnam, American people were, 2/3 of the American people were supporting the war. 3 years later, 2/3 of the American people were against the war. And what turned them around? And what turned them around, I think, is what you're talking about, that it took several years for the American people to grasp what was happening over there, because they didn't really know. And then they began to see images of massacres that we were committing in Vietnam, the My Lai massacre. How many of you have heard of the My Lai massacre? Yeah, I mean, this is horrifying to Americans. Wow, American soldiers go into this little village and they just mow down with their automatic rifles women and children, 400, 500 of them. This is shocking. But more images like that began to appear on the screen, more stories like that. When the American people began to realize what we were doing in Vietnam and asking, why are people dying? For what reason? That's when things began to change.
All right, we need to begin wrapping up, but there's just one final question that we'd like to pose to everyone in the audience, as well as Dr. Zinn, and it's that we know that knowledge and information and finding out what really happens around the world and in our own country is important, but that's the first step towards action. So what do we do now? We learn, we educate ourselves. What happens next? Especially what can the youth do to change all this? I mean, do we have to wait until every single audience member is in Congress to change what happens with American foreign politics? So does anyone have an opinion on that? Anyone who hasn't talked before?
Well, I think it's really education is probably the strongest point that we need to emphasize, mostly because, at least for this group, that we're youth. But I kind of have a question for everyone. I mean, I feel that we've all generally come to the consensus that the institutions that we're speaking of and living under aren't really working. And so I think the big question now is when it comes to our actions as youth and as our generation, do we just take almost a nihilist approach? We don't know what will work, but we do know what's working now doesn't, so let's burn it down, and when we start from scratch, then we'll know? Or do we work towards, you were kind of saying, reconsider our position in the world. You kept saying that's what we need to do because we know that what we have right now is not working. So I think that, the question we need to ask ourselves is more is it reconsideration, or is it, start from scratch? And I think that education is a really important part in that. So I don't know what everyone else has to say about that, but I think it's almost those are the two options that our generation has. Well, I guess there's three, which is keep going, and it's not going to work. Start from scratch, which I don't know, does anyone think that could work? Or is it just keep modifying? And if so, what are the actions that our generation can take to make these modifications, to make something a lot more a lot more better than it is right now, because we all identified that whatever it is that's happening right now is not anything we want to live with. So what's the next step and how?
I say we all, like, the youth of America, like, have, like, a great big rally at the White House and, like, voice our opinion, like the Black Man March and all of that stuff. All of the youth of America get together and just rally at the White House and demand for our voices to be heard.
Well, the way I feel about, creating and affecting a positive change in the world is my same general philosophy that I have on life, is that knowledge is power. And if you know, then you can act and you can inform others. And as long as you know what's out there and you inform others, then they can make their own decision about it. And whether they agree with you or not, it doesn't matter. But as long as people know what's going on in the world, then there's not any ignorance, and therefore there won't be any wars of just having a war for the sake of war, and there won't be any false accusations because everyone will know things. So, I think it's up to us because, in here we're a bunch of smart people, I guess, who know a lot of things, and like, it's our duty to pretty much inform others about it, and so then they in turn can make their own decisions about what we should do in the world. But, education only goes so far, and then there needs to be action taken, but before action can be taken, there needs to be a spread of knowledge.
Just to address Allison's question about whether we need to start from scratch or not, I think starting from scratch is a little bit radical. America has been based on making moderate changes and changes through elections and things like that, and we can change our country without completely starting over. And I think we can all agree that it's not our system of government that's the problem, it's the people in the government that are the problem.
Okay, last comment.
Just to go off of what Gina said, that people being educated, I think that everybody here should know that there's two sides to every story. The war in Iraq, there's two valid sides, why we should have gone, why we shouldn't have gone, and yeah, like Gina said, we should know both sides of this situation so we can make our own decisions. And we should not try and just force our opinions on everybody, but just look at it and let from each and every angle and let each person decide for themselves.
Thank you very much. And now we are going to introduce a poet. Her name is Invincible. And we're here to wrap up, basically. So here you go.
What's going on, everybody? How y'all doing? Good. Y'all good? See, Day Project, a lot of different people here. Thank you for coming to Detroit. And we appreciate everybody that's here. Thank you, Matrix, for letting us use your space. And like she said, my name is Invincible. I work with Detroit Summer. Anybody here heard of Detroit Summer? Yeah. Nah, not a little bit? All right. Well, I thought I was going to do 2 pieces, so do I have time for 1 or 2? Just 1? Okay, I'm trying to think which one I'll focus on. But I'm gonna give y'all an option. I'm gonna let y'all vote. It's democracy. Right in action, right now. All right, so would y'all rather have me do a piece about Detroit or about women in prison? Detroit? All right, there we go. Bam. There's a lot of women in prison in Detroit, so it all comes together, you know what I'm saying? Unfortunate. All right. So what area codes we got in this room? Let me think. Well, that's the obvious one. We got 313, we got some 248s, okay. We got some 734, 586. You got any 810s? 810? Okay, that's as far as our area code, Sprawl. All right, so basically this song is bringing everybody in the region together around the city, because the city is like the nucleus of everything going on around here, even though it gets hated on the most. But that's where it all began. That's where all the power and the energy and the beautiful ideas come from, and they circulate from there. So just break it down. All right. They twa is where we live and consider this. The thickest part of the mitten, because Michigan's the peninsula. This is an introduction for listeners. Internationally known city, but home, nobody could give a fuck. Less than Wayne County commissioners, making the killing off, fulfilling builders with prisoners, jailed in the cells perimeters. Call me the minister of information to the region. People leaving as indication of citizens, giving up discipline for the D. Deliverer of Ritalin, ridding y'all of the sickening case of ADD. The highest rates of poverty through it. Unemployment and bodily fluid. In the U.S. spreading AIDS. Epidemic, no paramedic can save us. Not Super Bowl cancerous committees or philanthropists who pity. What's the answer in the city? It's the beautiful. People who could see outside the cubicle to teach you what the future holds. This is the place where we dwell. They got us living in hell. The place where we dwell. The D, in Michigan. You listening? All right, so this is the repeat part. Now say 313. 313. Say 734. 734. Say 810. 810. Say 248. 248. Now say 313. 313. Worldwide, listen. Flooded in the dead of a hurricane, but it's slow motion. Great Lakes, miniature oceans. Try to vacate, but your movement's like the temperature, frozen. In its path of destruction, every plant, school, rec center, and hospital door closing. Getting privatized, like H. Pillar's water supply. Don't let them lead us to the slaughter. We getting caught in they lie. Phony smiles. Politics are greasier than the order at your corny eye. Put a quarter in your phone and dial. Tray one tray. I move from 734. You better be sure the D's got the remedy cure. From the youths to the elders, consistently truth tellers like Jimmy and Grace Boggs, Rob Williams and Ruth Ellis. So resourceful, so call a genius. The phoenix is rising up from the ashes like sewer steamers to set a precedent with cleverness. Remember this, describe as survivors, freedom fighters, never surrenderers. What? This is the place where we dwell. They got us living in hell. The place where we dwell, the D, in Michigan. You listening? Thanks a lot, y'all.
That's great.
All right, we'd like to thank everyone, the poets, Will and Invincible, the Matrix Theater for letting us use this amazing space, and Dr. Zinn, thank you for your insight. And all of you guys were today.
One really important thing I learned today was just that a lot of government programs that are really beneficial, like deaf community, that got cheated out of when the war started, and $500 billion was contributed to recently.
We're not going yet. I thought the students were probably, how do I want to say it, more informed, more provocative, more persuasive than many adults who I've seen interview with Mr. Zinn, and I think that's really an exciting thing. One of the best things about what I see from an event like this is that a lot of people think that the young people are not active, they're not involved, they're not interested. This is clearly something that shows very differently, and that's awesome.